Do you think you know how Marilyn Monroe died? The official version says, an overdose, loneliness, a locked door. But what if I tell you that when the police entered the room, the actress's body was still warm, and her housekeeper, at that very moment, was washing the bed linens? Medical reports that were hidden for 50 years prove one thing. The story we were told is physically impossible. Welcome. If you clicked on this title, it means you also feel that something does not add up in the story of Hollywood's most iconic blonde. You are here to learn the truth, and you will get it. Forget the rumors from the yellow press. To prepare this investigation, I examined countless pages of declassified Federal Bureau of Investigation archives, the reports of Coroner Thomas Noguchi, and interrogation transcripts that were never meant to become public. I spent 100 hours assembling a puzzle that others have tried to scatter for half a century. Today you will learn why Marilyn's empty stomach completely destroys the suicide theory, why the ambulance took her away from the house and then secretly brought the body back, and how the missing 35 minutes hide the names of the real accomplices. Get ready. What you are about to discover will forever change the way you see this tragedy. Reality turned out to be far more terrifying than any Hollywood thriller. Before we start looking for killers in the bushes or blaming politicians, we must understand the most basic fact: the weapon of the crime. The official version drilled into our minds says, Marilyn Monroe, suffering from depression, swallowed from 40 to 50 sleeping pills. If that is true, then the case is closed. But if science proves that this is a lie, the entire construction of the suicide collapses like a house of cards. And this is where the real magic of forensic science begins. What the pathologist found, or more precisely, did not find, completely changes the picture. Let us talk biology. Nembutal in the 1960s came in bright yellow capsules. These were not modern micro-tablets that dissolve without a trace. They were gelatin, dye, and a concentrated chemical compound. When a person swallows 40 or 50 of these capsules, a very specific reaction occurs. The stomach cannot process such a quantity instantly. The capsule shells begin to dissolve, leaving a thick, sticky mucus of bright yellow color. Crystals of undissolved substance remain on the stomach walls because during an overdose, the body shuts down faster than it can process the incoming poison. Pathologist Thomas Noguchi, who performed the autopsy, was a perfectionist. He knew exactly what he was looking for. He expected to find what physicians call a pool of colored sludge inside the stomach. Let us travel to the Los Angeles County morgue on the morning of the 5th of August. Dr. Noguchi makes the incision. He removes Marilyn's stomach, and that stomach is completely empty. In Noguchi's report, it is written clearly and unambiguously. The stomach contained no more than 20 milligrams of brownish fluid, no traces of capsules, no traces of yellow dye, no crystalline residue. Imagine that you pour an entire jar of yellow paint into a glass of water, and the water remains transparent. It is physically impossible. Noguchi was so perplexed that he even checked the duodenum. Perhaps the pills had already passed further. No, it was clean as well. However, the toxicology results of the blood showed an enormous concentration of barbiturates, 4.5 milligrams of the substance in the blood and 13 milligrams in the liver. A deadly dose, several times above the lethal threshold. So how did this deadly amount enter her blood and liver while bypassing the stomach? Science has only one explanation for a clean stomach, combined with a dangerously high concentration in the large intestine, where redness was later found. The poison entered the body not through the mouth. Marilyn Monroe was killed, accidentally or intentionally, by a barbiturate enema. In Hollywood at that time, it was a fashionable method of quick relaxation or drug administration, avoiding stomach irritation and avoiding nausea. This explains everything. The instant absorption, the absence of a vomiting reflex that would have saved her had she swallowed pills, and most importantly, the absence of traces in the stomach. And that means only one thing. She could not have done this herself. A person in a semi-conscious state cannot administer an enema. There was someone else in the room, someone with medical knowledge, someone who knew what they were doing. And if someone else was in the room, why was the body found in the pose of a lonely woman locked from the inside? But there is a detail even more frightening. If she died from an enema, death would have been fast. But witnesses claimed they saw her alive long after the official time of death. How is that possible? You will learn the answer next, and it leads us to the ambulance. The one nobody was supposed to see. This is the most explosive part of our investigation. Fasten your seatbelts, because this chapter destroys everything you have seen in British Broadcasting Corporation or Netflix documentaries. Here we approach the darkest secret of that night. The official story sounds like a tragic but peaceful scene. The housekeeper wakes up, notices light under the door, calls the doctors. They break in and find the lifeless body of a beautiful, sleeping princess. The police arrive and record suicide. But this version has one enormous problem. It is static. No one in this story moves. However, if we trust the witnesses who were silenced for decades, the night of Monroe's death was filled with chaos, sirens, and frantic movement. If Marilyn was taken out of the house alive and then returned dead, that automatically transforms the case from suicide into a criminal offense involving evidence tampering and desecration of a body. There was a witness whose testimony for many years was dismissed as too inconvenient. His name was James Hall, an ambulance driver for the private company Schaefer Ambulance. What he claimed is shocking. When he arrived at Monroe's house, she was alive. Furthermore, Hall stated that they did not simply confirm her death. They attempted to resuscitate her, placed her on a stretcher, and were preparing to take her to Santa Monica Hospital. Death did not occur quietly in the stillness of her bedroom. It happened in the midst of a medical blunder and panic. Let us reconstruct the chronology according to James Hall. The call came not shortly before dawn, as the official report claims, but much earlier. Hall and his partner entered the house. They saw Marilyn. She was unconscious, but she was breathing. Her skin had not yet taken on the color characteristic of a corpse. There was no rigor mortis. Hall began the standard resuscitation procedure. He used a respiratory machine, and then, attention, Marilyn began to respond. Color returned to her face. She had a chance. But another person was in the room. Dr. Ralph Greenson, her psychiatrist. According to Hall, Greenson behaved irrationally, almost hysterically, and demanded immediate action. Instead of allowing the paramedics to stabilize the patient and take her to the emergency room, Greenson made a fatal decision. He produced a syringe with a large needle, presumably containing adrenaline, and attempted to make an intracardiac injection, a direct shot into the heart, to restart it. James Hall described the sound that haunted him for the rest of his life, the sound of bone cracking. In panic and haste, Greenson missed. The needle struck a rib. Instead of saving her, he caused a pneumothorax or a shock response. At that very moment, in the hands of the doctors, Marilyn Monroe died. What next? If they took her to the hospital now, The autopsy would show a fresh puncture in the chest and a broken rib. It would no longer be suicide. It would be homicide by negligence committed by a famous doctor. The end of Greenson's career, a scandal for the Kennedys. And so they made a decision so cold it chills the blood. They removed the dead, or dying, superstar from the stretcher. They sent the ambulance away on an empty run, or according to another version, transported the body but turned back halfway. Marilyn's body was returned to that same bed. They undressed her, arranged the sheets, placed a telephone receiver in her lifeless hand, and created the perfect scene of a lonely death. This explains why the police were called only several hours later. They needed time to reset the scene. But while the doctors were panicking and deciding how to conceal the puncture and the broken rib, another person arrived at the house. A person whose presence that night was denied for 50 years. A man the police referred to as the General. With the arrival of this man, the case ceased to be a simple medical disaster. It became a matter of state. In any murder investigation, the first question a detective asks is, where was the suspect? In the case of Marilyn Monroe, the main phantom was always Robert Kennedy, the Attorney General of the United States and the brother of the president. The official narrative protected him for decades. That weekend, Bobby was supposedly vacationing with his family in San Francisco, hundreds of miles from Los Angeles. That alibi was considered untouchable. If he was in San Francisco, he could not have been involved in her death. But what if we prove that he was in Los Angeles, only a few blocks from Monroe's home, on the night of her death? Then the story transforms from a tragedy of a lonely actress into a political conspiracy at the highest level. Kennedy's presence at the scene would mean that the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Secret Service participated in a full-scale cleanup. The General, that was the code name for Robert Kennedy in police wiretaps and reports. The evidence of his presence is not gossip. It is the official field report of Beverly Hills police officer Lynn Franklin, who risked his career to tell the truth. That night in Los Angeles, there was a blackout zone in the protocols, strange movements of vehicles that the police were instructed not to stop. But Lynn Franklin never received the memo. Let us move to Olympic Boulevard, around 12 minutes past midnight. Officer Franklin was patrolling the streets. He noticed a black Mercedes speeding east, away from the Brentwood district where Marilyn lived. Franklin switched on his lights. The car stopped. He approached the driver's window and shone his flashlight inside. Behind the wheel, he saw Peter Lawford, a well-known actor and the president's brother-in-law. Lawford looked terrified, pale, and tense. But the most important thing was on the back seat. Franklin turned his flashlight toward the rear and saw a face known to every American. It was Robert Kennedy. By law, Franklin should have issued a ticket. But Lawford said, "Officer, this is the Attorney General. We are in a hurry on a matter of national importance." Understanding the hierarchy, Franklin let them go, but he made a note in his logbook. That traffic stop confirms one thing. Bobby Kennedy was there, and he was leaving Monroe's neighborhood precisely during the time when, according to the ambulance witnesses, the tragedy was unfolding. Neighbors also claimed they saw Kennedy enter Marilyn's house earlier that day and heard the sounds of a furious argument. Monroe shouted, "I feel like a piece of meat!" She threatened to tell the press everything. Why did Kennedy come personally? Not to kill her with his own hands? There are professionals for that. He came for the compromat. The argument spiraled out of control. It is possible that his presence triggered the hysteria that led to the sedative injection, the enema, or the mixture that turned out to be fatal. The officer who stopped his car confirmed Kennedy left before the police arrived. That leaves a window of 3 to 4 hours between Kennedy's departure and the official call to the station. What happened inside the house during those hours? While the body was cooling or being transported back and forth, the house was being thoroughly cleaned. And the person leading that cleanup was the very woman who was supposed to care for Marilyn, but was instead destroying the evidence. In forensic science, there is a rule. Behavior at a crime scene speaks louder than testimony. Imagine the situation. You find a loved one dead. What is your first reaction? Shock, tears, trembling hands, an immediate call for help. Now compare that to the official timeline. Death was pronounced by Doctors Greenson and Engelberg at 3:30 in the morning. But the police were called only at 4:25. For more than an hour, and possibly longer according to witness statements, 3 people were inside the house. 2 doctors and the housekeeper. What were they doing while the body cooled? They were not crying. They were working. Sergeant Jack Clemens was the first police officer to enter the home at 12,305 Fifth Helena Drive. He was an old-school veteran, cynical, observant, and impossible to fool. What he saw made him immediately say, "Something is wrong here. This is a staged scene." The most suspicious figure was Eunice Murray, the housekeeper hired on the recommendation of Dr. Greenson. She behaved not like a woman devastated by grief, but like a person caught red-handed. When Clemens entered the house, he was struck by the eerie cleanliness. No chaos, no disorder typical of a real emergency. But there was one sound that shattered the silence: the hum of a washing machine. At 4:30 in the morning, while the police were examining the body of the most famous woman in the world, the housekeeper was doing laundry. Clemens asked her, "What are you doing?" Murray answered vaguely, "I just decided to start a load of wash." Clemens walked into the bedroom. He saw Marilyn's body. She was lying face down, covered with a sheet, a telephone receiver placed in her hand. Her legs were extended straight, which is unusual for barbiturate poisoning, as victims typically curl into a fetal position. But the most important detail: the bed was far too clean. Fresh linens. No vomit, which is inevitable when someone swallows a lethal number of pills. No signs of struggle. Clemens knew instantly. The scene had been reconstructed, like a stage set in a theater. The body had been washed, repositioned, and placed into a beautiful pose, while the dirty bedding was thrown into the wash before the police even arrived. Why wash the sheets at 4 in the morning if this was a simple suicide by pills? The answer takes us back to what we discussed earlier. If death occurred from a rectal administration of barbiturates, an enema, then, after death, the sphincters relax. The intestinal contents, along with the administered liquid, inevitably leak out. The sheets would have been stained with a characteristic brownish fluid. If death occurred from an injection to the heart and frantic attempts at resuscitation, the sheets might contain blood or traces of medical procedures. Eunice Murray was not doing laundry. She was destroying the single most important physical evidence revealing how the poison entered the body. If there are no stained sheets, there is no proof of forced drug administration. They scrubbed the house spotless, but they forgot something that cannot be washed away. A small red notebook, the one where Marilyn recorded things that could destroy a president's career. And it was that notebook that Robert Kennedy came for. We have reached the central question of any detective case: the motive. Why kill America's sweetheart? Out of jealousy? No. She was killed out of fear. For decades, we were sold the image of a dumb blonde, a fragile woman who drank too much and was heartbroken over a president's rejection. That was a lie crafted by the people who wanted her silenced. Marilyn Monroe was intelligent, and she was furious. She felt used, passed around like a trophy from the older brother John Kennedy to the younger brother Robert. But Marilyn made a mistake that cost her life. She did not merely start an argument. She issued an ultimatum. She threatened to destroy the Kennedy political dynasty with a single strike. That transformed her from a former lover into national security threat number one. At the center of this storm was a small red diary, the Diary of Secrets. Marilyn's friends, including Robert Slatzer, saw this notebook. It was not a girlish diary filled with hearts. It was a catalog of classified information. Marilyn wrote down everything the Kennedy brothers carelessly discussed in her presence, believing she was too stupid to understand. Inside were notes about assassination plans against Fidel Castro, Operation Mongoose, the Kennedy family's connections with the Chicago Mafia and Sam Giancana, nuclear test programs, and of course, intimate details of their relationships. Several days before her death, Marilyn made a phone call that triggered the countdown to her murder. She called her friend, a journalist, and said a sentence that made the Secret Service go gray overnight. On Monday, I am holding a press conference. I am going to tell everything. She died in the night from Saturday to Sunday, one day before that Monday. A coincidence? In politics, there are no coincidences. When Thomas Noguchi arrived at the morgue, he noticed something strange. The deputy coroners were in a panic. They were not searching for medical information. They were checking the personal belongings that arrived with the body. The red diary was officially never found in the house. It vanished. That night, Marilyn's home had been turned upside down. Do you remember Robert Kennedy's visit? He was searching specifically for that diary. If the notebook reached the press on Monday, President Kennedy would have been impeached, and Robert Kennedy would have faced prison for his Mafia connections. The diary vanished forever. According to one version, it was stolen and destroyed by Coroner Lionel Grandison under pressure from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. According to another, Robert Kennedy himself took it. But the killers miscalculated one thing. They believed that by destroying the paper, they destroyed the information. They did not know that the walls of Marilyn Monroe's house had ears. While Kennedy and federal agents searched for the diary in the basement of a neighboring house, magnetic tape reels were spinning, recording every scream, every slammed door, and every final breath. Who installed the wiretap, and what did they hear? You are about to find out. We now move from paper evidence to proof that could be heard. If you think Marilyn was watched only by paparazzi, you are mistaken. Her home was quite possibly the most wiretapped private residence in America after the White House. This story has always lacked a true smoking gun, a direct piece of evidence capturing the moment of death. A body can be washed. A stomach can be emptied. A diary can be burned. But a recording made in real time by a third party is far harder to erase or falsify. We tend to think of this tragedy as an intimate drama between Monroe and the Kennedys. But there was a third player, the Mafia. Crime bosses, particularly Jimmy Hoffa and Sam Giancana, despised the Kennedys. They needed compromat to keep the Attorney General on a leash, and Marilyn Monroe's bedroom was the perfect trap. The man who placed the ears was Bernard Spindle, a legendary private detective and wiretapping specialist who worked for the Mafia. He filled Marilyn's home with listening devices from basement to attic. But the most important detail is this. The recording equipment was not inside Marilyn's house. It was stationed at a safe distance. Therefore, when Secret Service agents cleaned the house, they never found the tapes. Spindle later claimed, and this is confirmed in court documents, that he possessed a recording of that very night, a recording of her death. In 1966, 4 years after Marilyn Monroe died, Spindle's home was raided by New York City police led by District Attorney Frank Hogan. The official reason? An investigation into racketeering. The real purpose? Confiscating the Monroe tapes. Spindle begged them not to take the recordings, shouting, "You are destroying evidence of murder." But the boxes of tapes were seized and disappeared into the prosecutor's archives. However, several people heard the recordings before they were confiscated, including Spindle's attorney. Their descriptions are chilling. First, you hear voices, male voices. One of them was identified as the voice of Robert Kennedy. You hear the sound of a furious argument, the sound of blows, a woman screaming, then the sound of a door slamming, presumably Kennedy leaving, and then comes the most terrifying part. Silence broken only by the sound of heavy breathing, furniture scraping, and chaotic footsteps of the people who remained behind. The sound of shattered glass, possibly the same glass found by the bed. These tapes prove one thing. At the moment when she supposedly fell asleep peacefully, her home was a battleground. The Mafia knew. They heard her dying, but they did not save her, and they did not go to the police. Why? Because Marilyn Monroe alive was of no use to them, but a cassette with Robert Kennedy's voice at the scene of her death. That was a jackpot. It was a tool of blackmail that guaranteed the Mafia years of protection. Marilyn found herself trapped between a hammer and an anvil, the government on one side, the Mafia on the other. One side killed, the other side recorded. But for the plan to work, the public had to believe the lie. They had to sell the story of a broken woman. And now we reach the most emotional part of our investigation. Because to make the murder look like suicide, the victim must look like someone capable of suicide. For 60 years, we have been told she was a fading star, a depressed woman drowning in loneliness. But the facts say the opposite. She was a woman in the middle of her own rebirth. The most powerful weapon in the hands of her killers was not poison and not a syringe. It was the narrative. The authorities understood. Nobody would believe that a successful, joyful woman suddenly swallowed a handful of pills, so they launched a massive disinformation campaign. Newspapers wrote about a declining actress, depression, and despair. If we dismantle that myth, the last supporting brick of the official version collapses. People do not plan their future if they intend to die that evening. Let us look at Marilyn Monroe's calendar for August of 1962. This is not the schedule of someone preparing for the end. This is a plan for conquering the world. 1 week before her death, 3 events happened that should have made her the happiest woman in Hollywood. First, the restoration of her career. 20th Century Fox, the studio that had fired her earlier, came crawling back. They returned her role in Something's Got to Give, doubled her salary, and granted her full creative control. Second, the Life magazine photo shoot. Those famous beach photos. She does not look like a ghost in them. She radiates energy. Third, a wedding. And the key piece of evidence ignored by the supporters of the suicide theory is the date, the 8th of August of 1962. It was a Tuesday, 3 days after her death. On that day, Marilyn Monroe and Joe DiMaggio were scheduled to remarry, the only man who truly loved her. Joe had already left his job in Florida and was moving to California. The wedding dress was ready. The guests had been invited. You do not take your own life 72 hours before your wedding to the love of your life. Moreover, on Saturday afternoon, the very day she died, Marilyn called Joe DiMaggio's son. He recalled the conversation. She was cheerful, excited, and happy. She was laughing. She also ordered new furniture, expensive terracotta tiles for the patio, and trees. People about to commit suicide do not do landscaping. They give things away, not buy more. So where did the myth of depression come from? It was created by the man who was the last to see her alive, and who may have held the syringe. Psychiatrist Ralph Greenson. After her death, Greenson convinced the investigators to form a suicide prevention panel, which posthumously diagnosed her. He controlled the narrative to cover up his negligence, or his crime. He turned her normal pre-production anxiety into deadly paranoia on paper. Marilyn Monroe did not want to die. She fought for her life like a lioness. She defeated the studio. She regained the man she loved. She was preparing to expose the Kennedys. She was too full of life. That is precisely why she had to be stopped. Now only one question remains. Who pushed the plunger of the syringe? Was it a covert intelligence operation, or the fatal mistake of one man used as a pawn? All paths, political, criminal, and medical, converge at a single point, in the hands of one man. We already know that Robert Kennedy was there to retrieve the diary. We know the Mafia was listening. We know the housekeeper was destroying evidence. But Robert Kennedy does not carry poisons with him, and Mafia enforcers do not administer medical enemas. We need an executor, a person Marilyn trusted with her body and her life, a person whose negligence, multiplied by panic and political pressure, led to the fatal outcome. This puzzle does not fit together without Dr. Ralph Greenson. There is a theory known as the fatal cocktail. Marilyn was already under the influence of Nembutal, perhaps taken earlier in the day, or given to her by people connected to the Kennedys to calm her hysteria. Greenson, summoned by the housekeeper or by Kennedy himself, found her in a state of extreme agitation. He needed to turn her off, not kill her, simply sedate her. He used chloral hydrate, a powerful sedative, but Greenson, or whoever administered the drug, made a catastrophic chemical mistake. Chloral hydrate combined with Nembutal is not an additive reaction. It is multiplicative. Each substance amplifies the effect of the other by several orders of magnitude, shutting down the brain's respiratory center. The scenario of negligent homicide looks like this. Robert Kennedy leaves the house with the diary, leaving Marilyn in hysterics. The people remaining inside, possibly Peter Lawford or federal agents, call Greenson. Do something. She is about to expose everything to the entire neighborhood. Greenson, unaware of the exact dosage of barbiturates already present in her blood, decides to administer chloral hydrate rectally, the same method used in that enema, because it is the fastest way to sedate a patient without inducing vomiting. He performs the procedure. Marilyn grows quiet. Greenson leaves or steps into another room, believing she is merely asleep. But sometime later, they realize the truth. She is not asleep. She is not breathing. Panic erupts. They call an ambulance. They attempt the adrenaline injection into her heart, the one that broke a rib, and she dies. Marilyn Monroe was not killed by a sniper or a hitman. She was killed by a catastrophic medical error committed under political pressure. Greenson found himself trapped. If the truth surfaced, he would be branded a murderer and a narcotics abuser. the Kennedys would be implicated as accomplices, so the Federal Bureau of Investigation offered him a deal. "We will cover for you and call it a suicide. You confirm she was mentally unstable. The case will be closed." And that is why Greenson, the man who was supposed to heal her soul, became the architect of the myth of her suicide. He was not protecting her memory. He was saving himself. We have now traveled across the full 8 hours of that terrible night. From the empty stomach that screamed she had not swallowed pills, through the washing machine running at 4 in the morning, past Robert Kennedy's speeding car disappearing into the darkness, all the way to the broken rib and the fatal mistake of a doctor. Reality has defeated expectation. We expected the story of a sad blonde who had grown weary of life. What we found was the story of a strong woman who knew too much. A woman who was planning a wedding, rebuilding her career, and preparing to challenge the most powerful men in America. She was not killed by depression or alcohol. She was killed by the system. The negligence of a doctor, multiplied by the fear of a politician, combined with the silence of the Mafia, together created the perfect crime. Today we have returned to Marilyn Monroe her right to the truth. She did not give up. She simply ran out of time. This story is only the tip of the iceberg. If you think Marilyn's death is the darkest secret of the Kennedy family, you are mistaken. What happened 1 year after her death makes her murder look like a warm-up. There is a theory that the assassination of John Kennedy in Dallas was a direct response from the Mafia to the way the brothers handled Marilyn Monroe. If you want to know how these two deaths are connected, tell me, and I will reveal it. Like this story if it moved you, and subscribe to the channel. Hit that damn bell so you do not miss any of my videos. Tell me where I may have made mistakes, what remains unclear, or where you disagree. And by the way, what do you think about this story?